Morning, my name's Simon. Welcome to Bennett's BikeSocial. Welcome to sunny Malaga in Spain, and welcome to the launch of Moto Guzzi's 2024 Stelvio.
Hello and welcome to the first few miles on Moto Guzzi's 2024 Stelvio. Here in not on the Stelvio, funnily enough, on the Spanish version of the Stelvio pass. This beautiful countryside in Almeria in southern Spain. Fabulous riding, fabulous scenery. So, right, as usual, I'm going to blather on about the little bit of history about the Stelvio, a little bit about its spec, and then a bit more riding, and then I'll get to the sort of the verdict at the end of the day, and also compare it to its rivals. So, first time Guzzi used the word Stelvio, the name Stelvio, was in 2008 on the 1151cc adventure bike, using the old 8-valve air-cooled motor from the Grezzo. Not really suited to an adventure bike, to be fair. Big, heavy lump, 103 horsepower. I think about 86 foot-pound of torque, pound-foot of torque even. So fairly low revving, fairly cumbersome bike, but it had its quirks. Typical Guzzi. It was charming, it was quirky, it was different. It wasn't as sophisticated, clearly, as some of its rivals. You got the feeling Guzzi only built it because they felt like they should have an adventure bike, but didn't really know what engine to put in it. But the biggest problem with it was the first version came with an 18-litre tank, which was about the size of a peanut. You could just about start the bike, and that was it. In about 2012 or 2013, Guzzi revamped it and called it the 1200 NTX, and gave it a 32-litre tank, which was a bit more like it. You can actually get 50 quid's worth of fuel in that at some petrol stations on a motorway. I quite liked it. It was quite a charming sort of bike. Funny enough, I've never ridden the Stelvio Pass, but I have ridden the Stelvio. And yeah, like I say, charming, quirky, but crude in some areas compared to its rivals, which kind of summed Guzzi up at the time, I think, really, to be fair. Anyway, fast forward to 2023, and last year Guzzi launched the V100 Mandello Sports Tourer, a bike which I also haven't actually ridden, which is sort of another blind spot. I haven't ridden the Stelvio Pass, and I haven't ridden the V100 Mandello, but it didn't take a genius to work out that engine, that new water-cooled 8-valve engine, would find its way into an adventure bike. In fact, I can't remember if Guzzi teased the Stelvio at the time. They certainly developed it at the same time as the Mandello anyway. And the engine is in identical trim. So I'll run through the spec real quick of the motor. 1042cc, transverse V-twin, 90 degrees. I think Guzzi are the only manufacturer apart from Honda with the CX500 who've made a transverse V, and obviously they own it. That is their engine. The differences between sort of the Guzzi motors of old is that the heads have been rotated by 90 degrees. So where previously the exhaust would exit to the front of the cylinder and the inlet would come in from the rear, now the exhaust exits downward and the inlet's coming from the top of the motor, which of course allows Guzzi to move the throttle bodies and the airbox under the top of the tank and move the actual fuel back under the seat, lowering the centre of gravity. All fairly sort of standard motorcycle dynamic trickery, but nonetheless all advantageous. So yes, and this motor is making 113 horsepower at 8,700 RPM, and it's making 77 pound-foot of torque at 6,750 RPM. You'll note that is more power by about 10 bhp than the previous Stelvio, but it is less torque. And the reason is because it is a smaller engine at 1042cc. I subliminally keep thinking that this bike is a 1200, but it's not. It's actually a smaller engine than Honda's Africa Twin. So I have to keep remembering that. And we'll actually mention the Africa Twin quite a few times in this review, because there are lots of other similarities and a few differences as well. But anyway, I think that's its nearest rival. So, engine, where were we? Yes, so Guzzi have also added to this sort of lighter, more compact engine a counterbalance shaft, which negates the tendency of the transverse V to try and spin the whole bike around the crank when you blip the throttle. So there's no more of that Guzzi rocking from side to side. I'll talk a bit more about the character of the motor when I get into the sort of describing later on after I've ridden it. 6-speed gearbox. There is a quick shifter up and down available as an accessory. It's not standard fit. This bike is actually fitted with one, even though for some reason I keep using the clutch lever all the time. And then, yeah, so kind of mated to Guzzi's shaft drive. Clearly, again, another sort of sole example in its class. There's nothing at this sort of capacity in the adventure bike market that also has a shaft drive. And that is a big selling point for some people. There were a lot of complaints when the Africa Twin was... and when I say Africa Twin, I'm talking about adventure sports, by the way, of course, not the standard Africa Twin. Yeah, there was a lot of comment about that bike having a shaft drive, and then the NT1100 that came after it as a sports tourer, people thought that should have a shaft drive. But anyway, so yes, frame. Let's talk about the frame. It's a steel tube frame, same as a Mandello again, I think. It is 20% stiffer, say Moto Guzzi. It's mounted in, well, they say it's got more mounting points, and then they showed an image where it had 4. I can't believe the Mandello is only mounted by 2 engine points, but maybe it is. The engine is a stressed member. It's a very, very significant part of the rigidity of the chassis. For example, the footrests are actually hung directly off the bottom of the cases, which says something about the engine's smoothness, actually, because it really, really is a smooth unit. Yeah, so that's the frame. This all sounds a bit brief, really. I don't know if I'm missing things out, but forks, we have 46mm Sachs forks, preload and rebound at the front. We have a KYB mix and match shock at the rear. It's a cantilever rear shock. There's no rising rate linkage, and that's got preload and rebound. There's no semi-active on any of the Stelvio options. Clearly we have a 19-inch spoked front wheel. I think it's a 17-inch rear. We have 4-pop Brembos, and they are seriously strong, it must be said. And then in terms of a few spec numbers, it's 240, I think it's 246 kilos, which is not the lightest in its class, but it's there or thereabouts. Seat height is 830mm, which similarly is there or thereabouts. It's not the lowest in class. And then run through the electronic spec real quick. The Stelvio's got a 6-axis IMU by Morelli. So it's sort of, it could have, it's a shame it hasn't got semi-active suspension because it could inform that, but it has got cornering ABS because of that, so it does know its sort of its lean angle, its spatial position, and that also informs the traction control and the riding modes. We have 5 riding modes. Let's see if I can remember them all. We've got Sport, Tour, Street, Rain, and Off-Road. Is that 5? I wasn't counting. Each one has 4 adjustable levels of traction control, 3 levels of engine braking, and 2 levels of ABS, which can all be set up on a matrix for each mode. So I'm not sure, I don't think there's actually a specific user mode. I think you just tailor each sort of mode to what you want. And it's all sort of displayed on this 5-inch, fairly small it must be said, TFT dash, which is nicely in your eye line actually. I quite like it where it is, it's just sat there. And then in terms of trim, that's electronics. In terms of trim, we have this electronically adjustable screen, which again, I think is the only one in class in this particular category, this capacity. There you go, that's fully lowered. You can see that, and that's fully up. It's getting a bit of a wobble on there. And again, Guzzi said they spent an awful lot of time in their very famous wind tunnel, one of the first manufacturers to use a wind tunnel for their aerodynamics. And this bike has spent many thousands of hours, and you can see the result of that with these little wind deflectors here, and then the shape of the fairing. It's pretty wide, it must be said. I'll leave it on full just to try and keep the wind noise down as much as possible. And then what else have we got? So we've been through tank size. It's a 21 litre tank, and the bike is, let's see if I can find out what it's averaging, if I can remember. I think it's that button there. Yeah, look, we're averaging 49 miles to the gallon. And at 49 miles to the gallon, you'll be looking at, I don't know, what, 180 plus miles to empty from the tank. Probably more near 160 before you start getting itchy feet and the reserve light comes on. You could spend quite a lot longer on the bike because this seat is seriously comfy. So, what else have we got? So we talked about that. We haven't got heated grips in terms of trim. You've got the adjustable screen. You have got cruise control. I suppose, yeah, of course, I better talk about the radar as well. So, so forward-facing and a rear-facing radar. The forward-facing radar is for collision avoidance as standard, and what you get is a tiny visual signal here that there's something in front of you, you're too close to it, and there is an audible warning as well. Now, it's not very audible. With earplugs in, when you're doing sort of 50-60 miles an hour, it kind of sounds like you've got a squeaky front disc, and you can't hear it at first. You just think, where's that squeaky noise coming from? And then you realise that it's probably the proximity alert. You can turn it off, which I have, because it was getting annoying. But if you want forward-facing cruise control, adaptive cruise control, that's an optional extra. You have to pay more for that. Presumably it's already got the software, it's just there's a switch that has to be thrown somewhere to make it active. But anyway, that's an extra. And then in terms of the rear radar, you've got blind spot detection, so I don't know if you can see, but I can try and show you on the mirrors here. Little orange light lights up, and also you get a little visual indication on the dash. Now, Guzzi say they sort of divide their blind spot detection up into two pieces. There's sort of like blind spot detection in terms of vehicles that are coming up directly behind you, but there is also a kind of a lateral detection as well, which I don't think they mean T-boning. I think they mean cars that are changing lanes behind you that you can't see. But either way, a pretty comprehensive view behind from the radar. And that kind of splits, the radar is the difference between the two models. So you have the Stelvio with the radar and the Stelvio without. And we're just going to stop here while we wait for people to catch up. So yeah, let's quickly talk about prices. I'm sure I've forgotten lots of other stuff, like the USB port there in the dash. Prices, yes, so the standard bike is, the on-the-road price will be about £14,850. And with the radar, you're looking at £15,550 on the road cost. Again, I'll talk about how that sits with its rivals, primarily the Africa Twin, because I can't think of many bikes that have got a 19-inch front these days and spoked rims. It's a bit of an exclusive club, and then come with this capacity at this price with this performance. It really is the Africa Twin. But anyway, hopefully we're going to ride the bike a bit more, and if I've forgotten anything, I'll try and remember it in time to say it later on when we talk about the verdict for the bike, its dynamics and how it feels. Right, let's hopefully ride on a bit later.
Wow, that has been one interesting day riding Moto Guzzi's new Stelvio. And it's interesting for a number of reasons. The first reason is because I've never ridden this engine before. So I've not ridden the Mandello, as I said in the commentary, the V100. So that's a new experience for me. And of course, I've ridden the old Stelvio, but the new Stelvio is something else. So I've been thinking about how to describe the bike to you. I've been through the spec randomly, and I think the best way to describe the bike is to kind of try and tell you the experience I had when I was actually getting on the thing and riding it. Now, this comparison, as I've said before, will have some references to Honda's Africa Twin. A couple of reasons for that. The first one is I rode the new Africa Twin a couple of weeks ago, so it's quite fresh in my mind. And the other reason is there's a lot of similarities, and I know people will come to the Stelvio from all kinds of places and all kinds of bikes, and they will be comparing it to lots and lots of different bikes. It might not just be adventure bikes, they might be comparing it to maybe the V100 Mandello, I don't know. But the Africa Twin has a lot of similarities. Same size engine pretty much, same kind of performance, same 19-inch front wheel with spokes. And again, I know it's kind of us trying to put bikes into little boxes, but it's the only way we can really describe how they feel. It's a context for this bike. So if you want to find out about the Africa Twin, go and check it out on the BikeSocial YouTube channel. It's up there somewhere. There'll be a link in the description. But I'll be cross-referencing it with this bike, so you've got to do your homework. Go and see that one first. So right, so I thought I'd describe the riding experience first. So first thing in the morning, arrive at the bike, jump on it, and the first thing you feel is the riding position. And it feels natural, it feels good. It feels kind of bigger and wider than the Africa Twin. In fact, it is actually physically wider across this part of the seat. So with its, an 830mm seat height, it kind of feels a little bit taller than that. At 6 foot, I can get 1 foot flat and 1 foot on tiptoes. But there is a bit of width to the bike, which is it's quite nice when you want to travel for a long distance. It's nice to have that feeling of kind of a decent mass of the bike beneath you. And then the second thing that I thought of when I sat on the bike and sort of looked at the clocks was how far away the clocks are and how small they are. I've got to say, a 5-inch dash is pretty small. These days, dashes are getting bigger and bigger and brighter. This one is fairly small, and it's quite a long way away. When you sit on the bike, there's a bit of a gap between you and the clocks. Some of the writing's quite small. At my age, it's quite hard to see some of the writing. So that was the second thing. And that actual distance between the rider and the front of the bike has a bit of an impact later on when we're riding it. So anyway, so that was good. Riding position felt quite natural. Fire up the engine, and again, it's still a Guzzi, it's still a transverse V, but it's smoother, it's more civilized, it hasn't got that classic rock to one side because of the counterbalance shaft. So you could say it's not any other engine configuration, it's definitely a Guzzi, but I can imagine some die-hard Guzzi fans saying, do you know what, they've taken some of the character out of it, some of those kind of quirks and those foibles of that engine design. But again, I guess that's Guzzi's point. They're trying to make this bike appeal to a broader range of riders. A lot of manufacturers now are making their bikes more and more civilized. It's almost like a convergent evolution of bikes, really. They're just changing their switchgear so everything works the same way, so nobody has any different odd feelings when they first get on the bike. But there is that risk of robbing it of a little bit of that kind of Guzzi character. So yeah, fired up, no rocking, very smooth. Then we pulled away. Gearbox, this bike is fitted with the accessory quick shifter, which is an optional accessory. It felt great, it felt really good, really smooth, again, really civilized. You couldn't say that it was clunky or agricultural in any way. Felt really, really good. Then the engine performance, again, that's kind of the next thing that impinges on you. It is smooth, it is civilized. It's 113 bhp, they claim. I'd be surprised if 113 bhp get through to that back wheel through that shaft. It feels more like just over 100, to be perfectly honest, or maybe 105. It's not as lively as the Africa Twin. The Africa Twin has a real kind of vivacious bubbliness to it. When you open the throttle, the bike just leaps forward. The engine is deceptively quick because you look down at the speedo and you're actually going quite fast. It doesn't feel like it's working that hard to get you there. So 80 miles an hour, it's ticking over at 4,800 RPM, somewhere around there. So it is a very relaxed, very long-legged engine, but that does rob it of some essential urgency when you really want it to get a tramp on. But jump up and down the gearbox, it will move. It is over 100 horsepower at the end of the day. So what else have we got? At one point we were riding the bike at 3-figure speeds, and I'm not going to tell you exactly how fast it was. We were being led by Moto Guzzi, so it's their fault. And at that speed the engine felt perfectly happy. It didn't feel stressed, it didn't feel breathless, it felt like it had a bit more to come. And obviously you're not going to do those speeds on the UK roads, probably. But yeah, so it's a good flexible engine. Again, you might say it's just robbed of a little bit of Guzzi character, and that will become an issue later on, which I'll come back to with some other rivals for this bike. And at the pace we were riding today on sort of some of the really twisty roads out here in Almeria, the MPG was around about 49 to 50 miles per gallon on a 21 litre tank. That's going to take you 200 miles. That was quite impressive. I thought we'd be drinking a bit more fuel than that, so that was a good thing. When we were doing those speeds, another issue is this electric screen. Electric screen, great, I love them. This one, despite Moto Guzzi always going on about their wind tunnel, which is fair enough because they were one of the first to use one, it has a few issues. It's actually better, I think, for me at 6 foot when it's least, when it's on its lowest setting, because you kind of get like a mixed wind blast. You get some top end and some treble, but you don't get too much of that rumbly bottom end, which you sort of get around the bottom of your helmet. But as you put the screen up, you get this real kind of bass vibration going on. The top end disappears, but yeah, there's a real rumbling around the sort of the back of the helmet almost. And if you just lean forward a couple of inches, it starts to diminish, and it makes me think, it's not a natural position when you do that, but if you just dip your head a little bit, the rumbling gets less, and kind of points to me that there's somehow too much distance between where the rider sits, or where the rider's head falls, and the screen. And I think if the screen was somehow closer, if this whole unit was just a bit closer, it might be better for everyone concerned. But again, you know, you could say people go and fit their own screens, or they modify their screens. It's one of those things you do to personalise the bike and make it right for you. But a standard for a 6-footer, again, it's highly subjective. A lot of the guys on the launch weren't complaining at all, so maybe it's just me. Now, the biggest issue I had was the initial handling of the bike. Something didn't feel quite right. Admittedly, the roads were cold, and out here in Spain, they have a sort of a dew and a dampness to them, which is a bit disconcerting. But pulling away first thing in the morning, and then pretty much all the way to the first photo shoot, every time I went to turn in on the bike, it felt vague at the front end. It felt like the front was going to wash out, or was going to kind of oversteer and constantly run wide. And it was quite disconcerting. And it was at the moment, you've got very soft front forks, there's no compression damping adjustment, but there is rebound adjustment. And so, and also the shock at the back it's not stiff, but it feels a little bit crude. So what you tend to do is, as you turn into a corner, you brake, you wait for the forks to recover, and as they come back, you begin to turn in, as you would with, say, the Africa Twin on its new 19-inch front wheel, and sort of conventional road style. As you turn, the forks are still recovering, and the bike is almost sitting a bit too flat, and there's not enough weight on the front, so you have this vague feeling, plus the forks are still recovering. It's not really what you want. You want no fork movement as you steer the bike. And so I was kind of a bit like, I didn't expect that. I mean, it didn't turn the way I thought it would. So at the first photo stop, I jacked up the rear preload to max to just try and tip a bit more weight on the front. Didn't adjust the front suspension. I didn't want to add rebound because it had it was still recovering after this really long dive. 170mm this suspension travel, which is not vast, you know. I mean, I think the Africa Twin is somewhere around 200 still. So you can control that movement, but you need, the Africa Twin's obviously on semi-active suspension. This isn't, this is just sort of Sachs and a KYB shock. So anyway, a bit more preload kind of changed the attitude of the bike just enough for that oversteering, vague feeling to go away. I would imagine if you plop a pillion on the back, I mean the bike I was riding had boxes which were aftermarket accessories as well. If you plop a pillion on the back, I would imagine that would then tip it this way again and you'd get that vague feeling back. For me, I think it needs a little bit more height just to give it a bit more feeling at the front end and give it more, I guess, a more road-based feeling. So by the end of the day, I was having a bit of a blast. It was great fun. It was steering properly. It felt fine. It felt no problems, but it might need adjusting to suit your taste. So then we get onto sort of the extras on the bike. Sort of you start to play around with things and buttons and switch gear. Cruise control's all very good. It's good we've got that. We haven't got heated grips as standard. The menu's quite easy to navigate. The various modes are quite easy to change into. The radar at the front, I'm not entirely convinced, because for me the big bonus of having radar is adaptive cruise control. That's an extra. You've got the hardware, but you have to have Moto Guzzi, you've got to pay them to switch it on. That's dodgy ground with motorcyclists, as we know with KTM's experience. With the KTMs where you have a whole host of electronic functions that are built in, but they get disabled after about 1,500 kilometres and then you have to pay to have them put back on again. That's really annoying. Without that, all we've got at the front is a few little warnings, and they are little, warning symbols on the dash saying that you're approaching something, there's going to be a collision. You're not looking at the dash when you're about to have a collision. They don't really help you. They don't do anything. The Tracer 9 GT Plus with its radar will actually apply the front brake for you. Gives you up to 0.3 G braking when you're approaching an object that you're going to be hitting. This thing doesn't. There's no braking at all. So there's an audible warning, but it's barely audible. Sounds like the brake disc is squeaking. I'm not really sure what the point of the radar at the front is. And equally at the back, on the multistrada, the blind spot detection is very obvious. It blinks at you and you notice it. This little glowing spot here, you don't really notice it. So to be perfectly honest, I would buy the Stelvio that hasn't got the radar and save the money. Now, as I said, you're looking at 14,850 in the UK for the non-radar bike. Going back to our Africa Twin again, now with its semi-active suspension, Africa Twin Adventure Sport I should add, it's 16,299 in the UK. So that is quite a substantial difference. That's the best part of what, £2 grand. forgive me, it's the best part of £1,000. Maths is not my strong point. So yeah, so you're paying £1,000, you're getting better suspension, a more lively engine. I've got to say, the Average Twin is a good looking bike still with its paint job. It does look lovely. But you haven't got the quirkiness and the Moto Guzziness of the engine. So that's a choice you're going to have to make, which when it comes to choices, there is an elephant in the room. We've got to talk about it. It's called the V85 TT. Now, I've done a few videos on back in 2021 when Guzzi launched the bike, and I rode it around the UK. I did 1,000 miles in a day on it. And for a manufacturer like Moto Guzzi to make two adventure bikes, one's like a retro adventure bike and one is a modern adventure bike, you do come to Moto Guzzi faced with a choice. Which one do I want? And to be perfectly honest, if you want the one with the character, the classic Moto Guzziness, the air-cooled engine and all that kind of loveliness that we love about Moto Guzzi, you're going to get the V85, I suspect. If you want a thoroughly modern, or an attempt at a modern adventure bike, then the Stelvio is your option. But some of that Moto Guzziness, only some of it, is just drifting away a little bit as it becomes more refined and it becomes more homogenized and like everybody else's bike. And that's a problem because it suddenly puts it up against some proper competition like the Japanese stuff. Previously you could say, well, it's a Moto Guzzi, you want that character, that's what you get. Now you're saying, well, you get less of that character, the bike has to stand on its own merits. That is a really tough proposition. So it'll be an interesting choice to see what people come up with and what they buy. But anyway, I've rabbited on enough. If I've missed anything, and I probably have, then leave a comment down below. I shall come along and answer it, as I always do. So don't talk about me in the third person, please. Get your insurance from Bennett's, become a BikeSocial member and take advantage of all their offers. And after all of that, thank you very much for watching.